I'm delighted to introduce Jim Marrs, author of Rule by Secrecy and most recently Inside Job, who tonight is going to make a presentation on future technology from the past. And without any further ado, I'm going to pass the mic on to Jim Marrs.
Sorry, I'm kind of getting in the way here. Am I good? Am I good for the camera? Okay. Have the mic working? Okay. All right, we're going to move real quick here because we don't have the time that I would really like to expend on this, but I think this is kind of a complicated subject, and a subject that most of you are probably totally unfamiliar with. So, but I am going to hurry on through this because I think it's very important, and I think it may give us an insight into our unparalleled and unsupported mad rush to occupy Iraq. Slide. If you go back to the Bible, you find what has been will be again. What has been done will be done again. There's nothing new under the sun. We think that we have the leading edge in technology. We are the apex of the world's civilizations, but I don't think this is true. More and more, despite the foot dragging and naysaying by archaeologists and historians and everything else, we are more and more coming to learn that apparently at one point there was a planet-wide, highly technical civilization on this planet. And something happened, war and or geophysical changes, or both. And what we think of as our history, beginning with the Sumerians, coming up to the Egyptians, Babylonians, and then all up to the Greeks, Romans, Western civilization, of course, is what we're primarily talking about. That is nothing but the remnants of an earlier prehistoric civilization. The evidence is everywhere. The round balls of Guatemala, the pyramids all over the world, in China, in South America, Central America, Egypt, the ziggurats in Mesopotamia. All of the evidence is there. But it's only been within about the past 100 years that we've had the technology and or the knowledge to know anything about it. We're still pulling ourselves out of the dark ages. Let me start with a fellow named David Hudson. He was a Phoenix area farmer, and when I say a farmer, this is not a guy with a mule. He was a multi-million-dollar farm corporation. But he was having a hard time of it in the Phoenix area because the heat, the drought, it would dry up the soil. He was really having problems. So he got the bright idea of putting various acids and chemicals into the ground to see if he couldn't loosen up the soil. And when he did, he noticed that there were some very odd properties to this soil. Slide. He used a copper electrowinning cell to separate the metal from the ground, and he began to come up with these strange little sparkly mineral things that he couldn't quite figure out. And so he took it to some local chemists and local geologists, and they couldn't quite figure it out either. And it turns out that actually what he was dealing with was an unknown, heretofore unknown property, a monatomic element. Slide. He named it an orbitally rearranged monatomic element. Interestingly enough, ORME we find in ancient Hebrew meaning the tree of life. Isn't that interesting? And the reason he named it this, because these were single atom elements, okay, that were derived primarily from gold, silver, platinum metals. And slide. This was back in the 70s. By the late 80s and 90s, we see a number of scientific papers. This is being very much talked about in the scientific world, but is still not known to the general public, and it's pretty esoteric. These single atom elements can be rearranged by orbitally changing the nucleus of the atom. Slide. Now what he found was very unusual. When he was able to separate these monatomic elements from the ground and from other elements, it produced, and under certain heating procedures, he was able to produce a white powder. And when you put the white powder in a weighing pan, they found out the pan weighed less than it did before you put the powder in it. So it had some sort of anti-gravity property to it. Then it got stranger because they found out that if you heat treated it to a certain degree, the white powder would disappear. Well, now they really got excited because they thought, wow, you know, here's invisibility perhaps. And of course, then he started attracting attention from the big guys because who wouldn't want an invisible tank or an invisible plane? But what they found out is that they'd stir around in the weighing pan, you know, and say, gee, I wonder where it went. And then when it cooled off and came back to the white powder, it was in the exact same configuration as when they first put it in the pan. In other words, it didn't just disappear. It went somewhere. Okay, so now we're finding that this manipulation of this atomic material can shift it into another dimension. All right, so now they're getting excited because, hey, maybe this is the key to unlocking faster than light drive, limitless free energy, dimensional time travel. And they also found that it had physical properties, that you could ingest the white powder, and that it basically didn't heal you, it cleaned up your DNA and make you where you didn't have to be healed. So now we're talking about perhaps longevity, because we all know that every few weeks or so, every cell in your body is regenerated. There's not a cell in your body today that's the same cell that was there, say, 10 years ago. All right? So why can't we live for hundreds or thousands of years if we just keep regenerating our cells? Because at the end of our DNA strand is what they call the telomerase caps. There's a cap on our DNA. And when it gets to a certain time in your life, those caps kick in and you quit reproducing the cells. And what happens then? You age and you die. Oxidation. Slide. Now, we know today that the structure of the atom is a lot different than what I was taught in school. This is Walt Disney's version, you know, our friend the atom. And we now know the atom is composed of all these various things, which I won't bore you with, mainly because I don't even understand them myself, because I don't claim to be a scientist or a highly technical person. I'm just a reporter, okay? Slide. But the atom is totally different. But we also know that in the atom, the nucleus, and then you have your electrons and protons and neutrons. The atom is mostly space. This is what I mentioned earlier about the fact that even our reality, everything we think is really hard and solid, is really just made up of atoms, and within those atoms is an immense amount of space. And yet within those spaces, the energy generated by these neutrons and protons and stuff is absolutely immense. And we're finding out things about this continually. They recently found out that protons have mass. Okay? It's a complete surprise to me. I didn't even know they were Catholic. It's a joke. All right, slide. They also found that by treating these monatomic elements, you can change the shape of the nucleus. And you can turn it into a dumbbell-looking thing. And I found that really intriguing because, of course, we all know that that looks very, very close to what the symbol for infinity is. So what we're dealing with here is the basic building blocks of life, energy, the universe. Slide. It also could be what we're learning to adapt as fuel cell technology.